Best known as the original vocalist for Jamie's Elsewhere, Chris Paterson has been outside of the public eye for the better part of nearly a decade. So, what's he been up to, or whatever happened to him? After spending several days no-lifing the internet, I think I found some semblance of an answer. So, let's explore his history and see why Chris Paterson was almost famous. Chris's music career begins in Grass Valley, California, when in 2002 he would form his first successful band, Picket Line. Although the group started as a four-piece, Picket Line was an emo trio, and by emo I mean both the subculture and the genre. The trio consisted of Chris on bass and vocals, guitarist Wesley Avery, and drummer Trey. The band would remain unsigned for the entirety of its existence, and in 2005 they would self-release their only album, Chapter End. 8 out of Chapter End's 12 tracks are considered semi-lost media, as they are not readily available anywhere online. The only 4 that have been found so far are Black and White, For the Time, Arizona, and Dancin'. Produced by Cale Holmes and Sylvia Massey Chevy at Radio Star Studios in Weed, California, this album is straight emo. There are no screams to be found here. The closest to a scream may be being singing with more intensity or something akin to yelling, but never screaming. They would spend the following year preparing for shows that would never come, as in 2006, Picket Line would ultimately disband due to issues with management. Towards the end of 2006, Chris would join Dead City Sunday, replacing Nick Musser on bass when he and guitarist Nick Brothers left to join the army. While in DCS, he would cultivate his high vocal range with help of lead vocalist Zach Day. In the winter, this lineup would record 2 live music videos. One, an acoustic rendition of their original, Shining Chrome Knife, the other, a cover of the Outfields' song, Your Love. Sometime after these recording sessions, Chris would attempt to try out for Sacramento-based act Jamie's Elsewhere. At the time, Jamie's had eyes on their MySpace page, mainly due to Matt and Anthony Scarpelli's contributions to the previous project, Mozart Season, as guitarist and drummer respectively. After Mozart Season's first lineup disbanded in January of 2006, the Scarpelli brothers began recruiting musicians for their new band, Jamie's Elsewhere. Although a car accident would cause Chris to miss his initial audition with them, he would get another chance when in May of 2007, members Kyle Spearman and Anthony Karyosha attended a house party hosted by Kay Sarah that Chris would perform at. Impressed by his vocals, they would invite him to join Jamie's the next day for a practice session. During this time, DCS was falling apart, with drummer Kim Brothers getting married, guitarist Ronnie Weedman wanting other things out of life, and the 4-piece as a whole stagnating as a party band. This would lead to Chris accepting their invitation, and the following day, he and Jamie's entered Death Spot Studios, ending his time with Dead City Sunday. A month later, on June 22nd, Jamie's would release their debut EP, Goodbye Rocket Man, St. George is Under Fire. While the EP did well stateside, in Japan it reached number 1 on their alternative rock charts and stayed at number 1 for 6 weeks. The quick turnover had produced poorly mixed, rushed mess, but the core of it was so strong that most people were able to look past its flaws and see the promising act Jamie's could grow to be, if given the right resources. So when the band signed with Victory Records on October 22nd, their MySpace fans were hyped. They would enter the studio again in the winter to record their debut album and shoot a music video for its lead single, I Didn't Mean to Interrupt. On May 27, 2008, Jamie's debut album, A Guidebook for Sinners Turned Saints, would drop. This LP would feature re-recordings for 4 out of the 6 tracks found on their Goodbye Rocket Man EP. Throughout these 2 releases, we hear Chris explore his upper register for the first time, as well as start to implement unclean vocals into his music. While I don't often find myself re-listening to A Guidebook for Sinners Turned Saints or Goodbye Rocket Man in full, I do frequently revisit the tracks The End of Innocence and I Didn't Mean to Interrupt. Comparing the 2, I would say that Goodbye Rocket Man is a good first attempt at what Guidebook would become. Throughout the EP, it feels as though Chris is struggling to hit the higher range of his upper register, with the sound almost becoming a bit screechy. On Guidebook though, it feels a lot more natural and like he's almost floating while he twists and turns in and out of these airy moments. With that being said, the reason I struggle to recommend these releases to everyone is that most of these songs overstay their welcome by about a minute. By the end of some tracks, you're ready for them to be over and to start hearing something new, weakening the listening experience in a way that I find unfortunate. But if you are a fan of late 2000s and early 2010s post-hardcore, these are albums that you should really check out because it's that kind of sound. It's really nice. And if you haven't checked these out, where have you been living, man? It's late 2000s, early 2010s post-hardcore. These are staples. From May until August, Jamie's Elsewhere would promote the album by going on a string of shows as well as a tour with Emarosa. Overall, Guidebook would start to gain some traction, but by late August, Chris would leave the band, alongside bassist Nick Rodriguez. The main motivating factors behind his resignation were a growing amount of tension and infighting within the band, as well as them booking a tour during a time that he required surgery without first approaching him. This unexpected tour presented him with the ultimatum of having to pick between his health or the road. After deciding on his well-being, he would reach out to Raising Alexandria's multi-instrumentalist and lead vocalist, Aaron Pauley, asking him to fill in as Jamie's frontman. Aaron accepted, and by September of 2008, he joined Jamie's as a permanent member and disbanded Raising Alexandria. For the next 6 months, Chris did relatively little musically, but the following year, he would join his next musical venture. In early 2009, Chris was contacted by Kentucky-based metalcore outfit Sea of Treachery. At the time, they were at Tim Lambesis' studio in San Marcos, California, recording the follow-up to their debut-ish album, At Daggers Drawn. Following the departure of bassist and clean vocalist Kevin Butler, they were in need of a replacement. Over the course of a few weeks, they would audition singers by flying them out and having them record a demo in studio, with the group eventually deciding on Chris. During the summer months, Sea of Treachery would hint at what was to come with the demo singles Skin Deep and The Comedian Is Dead. To promote their sophomore-ish release, this new lineup would embark on a co-headlining fall tour with Suffocate, but halfway into it, unclean vocalist Alex Helfman would be removed. Chris would then be promoted to the position of frontman for the remaining dates, but after the Be Shred or Be Dead tour concluded, Sea of Treachery would disband in December of 2009. In October of the following year, the former band members were approached by Black Heart Group to potentially distribute the album. They'd sign on to the record label with the understanding that Sea of Treachery's second lineup didn't want to tour it, and on December 14th of 2010, Welcome to Wonderland was unveiled. This album is great conceptually, but in execution it's pretty lacking. Chris's vocals were processed with a pretty significant amount of pitch correction, and in some instances it reaches a point where his voice begins to sound kinda artificial. Unfortunately, this isn't in a way where he sounds like your favorite Vocaloid waifu, but rather a musical version of the Uncanny Valley. The instrumentals have also been compressed to hell and back with waveforms that probably resemble the Great Plains of the Midwest. It's sad because in certain moments, the album we almost got bleeds through, and when it does, it's easy to get into a groove with a lot of these tracks. Inevitably though, we hit a snag along the way where the poor mixing and mastering begin to cut in and take you out of the listening experience. It's this cycle of it opening a musical door just enough to let you peer in and excite you, before slamming it in your face as you approach the threshold. When that happens, I'm snapped away from the imaginary album I can almost hear into the reality of the album I have in front of me, and it's disappointing. I don't dislike this release. In fact, I'm only this upset because I do like it, but it clearly would have benefited from a more involved producer who could have at least given this LP the care it needed. On a technical level, Welcome to Wonderland is better than anything Jamie's ever did. Sonically though, it's not nearly as diverse. If you're interested in listening to this album while minimizing its metalcore elements, check out the song You Speak Only in Vowels. It's the lone track on here that solely features Chris's clean vocals. With all of that said, I'm not as knowledgeable in metalcore as I am in post-hardcore, so I don't know if this is a mediocre metalcore album or if this is a good one. To me, it just sounds like chuggy metalcore of its time, but because it followed guitarist Voice Guy Jack's vision and blended it with the Chris and Alex Helfman sound, it definitely has an identity of its own. This would be this lineup's only release, as in early 2013, Sea of Treachery would reform with its original members. From January to April of 2011, Dead City Sunday would reform for a short time with Chris reprising his role as a bass player, but by May, he would replace Davey Sparks as lead vocalist for Above the City, a then-rising Sacramento-based post-hardcore group. They would play their first show together opening for Skylit Drive on May 21st, and a month later, on June 30th, they would upload the single Where Only the Shells of Men. This song sounds so much like Jamie's Elsewhere that I was thrown off when revisiting it for this video. It's almost like peering into an alternate timeline where Chris and Jamie's never split, and almost blends the sound of both They Said a Storm Was Coming and Guidebook. Chris's screams have also evolved a bit, with him moving from a scratchy screamo sound to a fuller fry and growl. Although it has some chugs and a typical metalcore breakdown, this is very much post-hardcore. While a promising combination, it would not last, as on August 26th, Above the City would break up. Chris would start out 2012 by joining Orange County's Burn Halo as a touring musician on January 3rd. His involvement this time around was limited to providing rhythm guitar and backing vocals. In May, he would leave the band when he was offered the opportunity to front another. From June to July, he would join the Bunny and the Bear on stage for the Under the Gun tour as the Bear 2.0. During this time, he would replace their original clean vocalist Chris Hutka while he completed a stint in rehab. His tenure would be met with pushback from fans, as they were not informed of Hutka's absence and some were disappointed to not see the original The Bear that they had paid to see. Others were more receptive and appreciated the energy The Bear 2.0 brought in his live performance. A third group was just genuinely confused as to whether or not Hutka and Paterson were the same person. While his time with them would not produce any music, it would give us 3 interviews, including one with YouTuber Brian Stars. These are his only interviews to date. Although he was offered the role of fronting the band as a permanent member, once the Under the Gun tour concluded, Chris Paterson and the Bunny and the Bear would part ways. In winter of 2012, he would attend Ronnie Radke's birthday party, where he was introduced to Michael Orlando and DJ Black of the then shock rock act Vampires Everywhere. Following Philip Cross's departure, they were in need of a replacement, and Chris was available. So when Michael approached him and asked how much it would cost to get him on the road with them, he responded with, "Just pay my rent and food." Beginning in March of 2013, he was once again fulfilling the duties of a rhythm guitarist, but almost immediately, problems would arise. During this period of his life, Michael was convinced he was a literal vampire who could control others.
I started really getting into the vampire culture of things, starting to think that, maybe I'm a living vampire, maybe I'm someone that has these psychic powers and drains people and all this kind of stuff. Now, maybe, I don't know, some of that could be true now. I've heard a lot about me that I'm like this sort of psychic vampire and have a lot of energy, and, that could be true.
While he was probably able to manipulate people to some degree, it was most likely through his charm, financial position, and influence, not the occult. He allegedly presented weight loss challenges for the other band members while nagging them for being what he considered to be overweight, but expecting them to drink every night to appease fans and sponsors. Michael Vampire also allegedly withheld pay from Chris, making him unable to pay rent. Following a performance for Rob Zombie's Great American Nightmare, this would all come to a head when in late October, a drunken Michael and Chris had a physical altercation that resulted in Chris having 2 broken ribs. In November, Vampires Everywhere disbanded for the first time, reforming as the Killing Lights without Chris, but using a song he co-wrote with DJ. The track, Lies Spread Like Fire. The song's lyrics are about Chris's feelings towards Michael, but I guess he lacked the self-awareness to understand what they meant. Personally, I preferred the original to Michael's version, but there's something kinda charming about someone unknowingly performing their own diss track. In late summer of 2014, Chris would replace Jeremy Mertz in post-hardcore band I Wish We Were Robots. Right after joining, he spent 2 weeks in studio with producer Eric Ron, re-recording vocals for Robots' unreleased debut album, In Search of Sanity. In Search of Sanity had already been fully produced once, with Jeremy providing vocals, but now that he was no longer with Robots, it made sense to replace his performance with Chris's. Neither version was ever supposed to see the light of day due to issues between Robots and Eric Ron, but both have now leaked. If the albums were pizzas, then I would compare Jeremy's version to a slice from a major chain brand. While he swaps out vocal toppings with each song, the core ingredients are pretty consistent, so much so that by the time the album starts to wrap up, you kind of know what to expect, but it's pleasant, inoffensive, and accessible. Chris's take I would compare to a slice of deep dish from a local pizzeria. Although it's far more dense in flavor, not every track is as accessible, so you're never quite sure what to expect. While the toppings do still change the end product, the vocal techniques used in his preparation affect the taste far more. Both versions deliver a similar end product as they have identical instrumentals, but the change in singers is enough to provide a different experience. Unfortunately, shortly after these recording sessions concluded, Chris would receive bad news that I will let him deliver for himself.
I was having discomfort. It kind of felt like the tickle that you get in the back of your throat when you're just getting like the flu or something, or if you get like something stuck in your ear and there's like a pressure in there, you can't like really get it out. I was having that kind of just a incessant annoyance that I didn't know what the fuck it was, but it wasn't bothering me too much until like we got into tracking for a couple of days, and I was noticing like I was still singing well, and, like I was still being able to perform the parts, but I was having to try a lot harder for some things, and I was having to retake things that were either in my highest registers or especially with screams. It seemed like with tracking screaming, my voice was like catching. I had a weakness there that wasn't there, and I've been doing this the same way for over a decade at this point, and like taking care of myself far worse. Like right now, I'm like in studio drinking tea, like doing the right things, and it feels like there's something off in there. And so we finished the record, and when I got home, and it still persisted, I went to the doctor about it, and they checked, and they didn't find anything, and thought it might be like psychosomatic. So that was what they thought. Because it felt like I had like a bug in my ear. Like I had a weird like incessant fucking like itch inside my ear. Ultimately, it was behind my eardrum, but like you're not gonna find that with a finger. And then and I just my voice felt okay, but I had noticed just a change in its response to me. It was like driving your car, but somebody moved your seat all over the place. And after about a week of like thinking it's all in my head, I was going to shove a Q-tip through my brain. So I said, "Screw this! I'm going back." And so I made a appointment with an ENT, and they put a scope up my nostril, and they found polyps on my vocal cords. And so at that point, we just kind of assumed that through like process of elimination, probably screaming and singing for a decade, I had been putting undue stress on my vocal cords, and it was finally starting to catch up with me. So we did like a laser surgery to remove the polyps, and went home. And I went back about 3 weeks later for my checkup, and that's when we found out that they were malignant. They had come back in full force. Ultimately, I basically caught the pre-cancer version of a very aggressive throat cancer right before it completely overloaded my throat. So at that point, I had to go back for laser surgery. They also had to go a invasive surgery to remove a cluster that was at the top of my vocal folds, like almost kind of created like a knot right where my vocal folds met. And then I did a bout of localized radiation. I didn't have to do chemo or any of that, but the surgery left a lot of scar tissue, especially with how like the placement that the cluster of nodules was. It wasn't allowing my vocal cords to vibrate anymore. So not only did I lose my singing voice, but I completely lost my speaking voice. And as far as the doctors were able to say, they couldn't guarantee me that I would ever be able to talk again, or when, or how long, or if I would get my singing voice back, or how long it would be. It's a complete crapshoot. It could be 6 months, it could be 6 years.
Although In Search of Sanity was his last recording, he would still put out music in 2014 that had been tracked in 2013. On September 22nd of 2014, Chris's final band, Kaioken, released their self-titled debut EP. Produced in early 2013 by former Picket Line guitarist Wes Avery, this 6-track extended play is jam-packed to the brim with the energetic sound of anime intros. When I listen to this release, I feel like I'm simultaneously flying and sitting in a rowboat in the middle of a lake as a cool breeze passes over me. Unlike Sea of Treachery, every song feels different and fresh. Unlike Above the City, this doesn't sound like Jamie's Elsewhere. And unlike Jamie's Elsewhere, none of these songs overstay their welcome. 8 years later, these 6 songs still strike some chord in me that I struggle to put into words. The listening experience is like the sensation of touching grass after spending too much time alone, when you start to see the forest for the trees, or the taste of drinking water after eating a mint, where something that once was bland now has taste again. Without a doubt, this is Chris's best material to date, with the exception of one more song. Earlier that year, on January 13th, Chris would upload a live rendition of a musical piece entitled I'm Sorry. It's hauntingly honest in its execution, with Chris covering everything from substance abuse, to lost love, to moving to avoid responsibility and becoming someone you never intended to be. Outside of the interviews, the Kaioken EP and this song are the closest we ever got to meeting Chris Paterson the person, and it works perfectly as a closing track to his discography. Ultimately, I do think that the closest Chris ever got to being famous was being in Jamie's Elsewhere. Sea of Treachery would peak with Welcome to Wonderland's release, and while he could have replaced Chris Hutka as the bear, he was always going to be the guy who replaced Chris Hutka, not Chris Paterson. Above the City had some traction back in 2010 to 2011, but I don't think they were big enough that him joining or leaving them was going to make or break his career, since he'd basically have to start from scratch with them anyway. With the band he was playing rhythm guitar in, he was always going to be playing second fiddle to someone, and he was never going to be the main vocalist, so I think it's for the best that he didn't stay with them for long. Finally, I do think he had a chance of having a second win in his career with Kaioken. That EP was actually kickstarted and fully funded in part because they announced Chris Paterson as their lead vocalist. At the time, Jamies were on the verge of a breakup, and fans of Guidebook and Goodbye Rocket Man genuinely wanted to see what he could do when given the opportunity to front another band. Unfortunately, he kind of ghosted the guys from Kaioken after he had to go through his medical procedures, mainly due to him literally being unable to sing or even speak for a while, which really sucks because I would have loved to have seen them live. In general, I just would have liked to have seen Chris perform in some degree with any band he fronted, because he clearly basked in the performance aspect, and it's a shame I didn't get the chance to see that. But life is what it is, and I can still watch these videos and look at what it may have been like to experience this time we won't be able to revisit again. I had quite a long conversation with Chris when fact-checking this video, and that discussion will probably be broken up into multiple parts and uploaded somewhere. Something I want to make note of is Chris has uploaded a bunch of demos to his SoundCloud, and he's actually working on acoustic versions for all of the Kaioken songs, and I'm excited and looking forward to them. There isn't enough footage for me to make a live music video at the end here like I like to do, so I'm going to close things out a little differently and include 1 minute from his 7-minute I'm Sorry recording, just to give you all a bit of a taste and hopefully push you all to check out that release. Yeah. I hope you all have a nice day. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and stay rad.
They started racing, all came tumbling out at once. How I had become selfish and a miserable drunk, but you already knew that. I'm sorry that I moved away, for the things I'd taken for granted, for the trust that I betrayed. How all I did was run, when all I wanted was to stay. And I think about it every day. But do you know what I miss? That independent, beautiful woman that I never could